Welcome everyone to another video discussion of free answer writing practice by Vajiram and Ravi. In this video, we are going to see three questions, two questions from GS1 Geography. We are going to see topics from distribution of key natural resources and factors responsible for the location of primary, secondary and tertiary sector industries. Let us see the overview of those questions. The very first question is with respect to ethanol blending. We do understand that India has certain kind of strategy with respect to securing the energy needs, and for the same government initiated ethanol blending. We are going to see that there are several benefits with respect to the same, and also there are several challenges. In second question, we are going to talk about virtual water export. We will understand what exactly virtual water export is. We will talk about how exactly virtual water export happens in India and what are some measures for effective water management in this context. And the third question is a current affair question where we are going to see that how India is actively pushing for energy diplomacy and there are certain challenges with respect to the same. So we will be looking at this question from current affairs perspective. So let us start with the very first question. Let's read the question together. Ethanol blending will lead to many benefits. However, there are several challenges which need to be resolved first. Discuss. Now in this question, you have to tackle the definitional aspect with respect to ethanol blending. Then in the body, the first heading will be about the benefits, where you can list 4 to 5 dimensions about the benefits and substantiate with example. Then in the second heading, we are going to talk about the challenges with respect to the implementation of ethanol blending. And then in the conclusion, we can talk about that there are certain measures already taken by government to augment ethanol blending. So let's start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can either define what exactly ethanol blending refers to. Ethanol blending refers to mixing of high-grade ethanol with automobile fuel to ensure that there is certain degree of lesser dependency on fossil fuels. So that is something you can write over here as a meaning. You can also talk about certain context, as in what exactly government has initiated, as in ethanol blending program has been initiated, and since 2013 to 14 till 2022-23 we have seen rise in ethanol blending. Previously we had almost 2% of ethanol blending. Now this has been increased to almost 11%. And for the same, government is very optimistic with respect to ethanol blending, and this target was increased to 20% for 2030. Now again government has revised the deadline. This target is now set for 2025. So this is something you can write in the introduction, definition of ethanol blending. You can also draw certain diagram to represent how exactly ethanol blending happens. You can also talk about certain government initiatives and certain targets and how exactly ethanol blending is helping with respect to energy security. Let us see the body heading 1, where we have to directly tackle the demand of the question, which is benefits. Over here, we will list down different benefits along with certain examples. Firstly, the very primary benefit of ethanol blending is self-reliance. Over here, India has been quite dependent with respect to crude oil, where 85% of the crude oil is imported. Now, to make sure that India is self-reliant with respect to the energy part, ethanol blending can definitely compensate up to certain extent. The next is reduction in pollution. As ethanol does have minimal amount of issues with respect to carbon monoxide emission, then even Niti Aayog's report have represented that how ethanol blending helps with respect to reduction in such kind of emissions. Next is saving of forex. Over here, as we already talked about that how we are import dependent, and for the same India have to exchange the forex to ensure energy security. India can annually save almost 30,000 crore through this kind of initiative. And lastly, it will augment farmers' income as ethanol is extracted from food grade sources, and that's how we can also envisage rural development. So these are the kind of benefits that ethanol blending program can help for India's energy as well as agricultural sector. Let's see the issues which is also the primary demand of the question. The very first issue is with respect to the excess of raw material. We do understand that sugarcane is primary source for ethanol. However, it is a water intensive crops and it has certain issues with respect to groundwater depletion. You can also talk about it, how it also impacts food security. At the end, ethanol is extracted as a biofuel. Over here, we have to understand that biofuel grade 2 kind of ethanol production has direct impact on food security. The next is supply chain management. We have to understand that there are limited places where we can have this kind of setup, and because of that kind of limitation with respect to the location of industries, we have issues with respect to supply chain management. The next is higher compliance cost for the companies. The companies which we are talking about are automobile companies. They have to upgrade their engines, and that can augment the price by 5%, and that will have direct impact with respect to the customer behavior. And the last point you can write over here is price volatility. We have seen that the raw material price such as sugarcane have witnessed large amount of fluctuation because of certain government policies such as FRP. There was 7% increase in 2019. So that kind of points, that kind of rise can have direct impact with respect to the sustainability of ethanol blending. So these are the kind of challenges with respect to ethanol blending. Let us see the conclusion. Over here, you can talk about way ahead or government initiative with respect to ethanol blending. In way ahead, you can talk about that how ethanol blending can be derived from certain other sources so that there is no issue with respect to food security. Also, you can talk about that how with respect to ethanol blending program, there are certain revised target, as in 20%. Government is also making sure that they are financing this kind of project. Apart from that, we also have certain initiatives such as administrative pricing mechanism to control the price such that there is no issue of price volatility. Next is Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Yojana. This also empowers the rural as well as tribal population along with ensuring ethanol production. And lastly, National Biofuel Policy. Now this is a very comprehensive policy which helps with respect to understanding the entire setup of ethanol blending in India. Apart from that, there is a novel point you can add over here. In the latest G20 meeting, we witnessed Global Biofuel Alliance. Now, this kind of initiative from Indian government represents that how serious that government is pursuing this kind of initiatives to ensure there's not just energy security for the nation, but for the entire globe as well. So this is the kind of collaboration efforts that Indian government is trying to make. You can add this kind of points in the conclusion as well. So let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about what exactly is ethanol blending. You can talk about certain kind of targets. You can talk about certain kind of processes as well. In the heading 1 of the body, you can list down the benefits along with the substantiation. Similarly, for the challenges, you can list down the challenges along with the substantiation. And in the conclusion, you can talk about the government initiative, and you can also talk about the significance in brief about ethanol blending. So that is all for question number 1. Let's move on to question number 2. Let's read the question together. What is virtual water export? Discuss as to how it depletes water resource in India. Also suggest some measures for effective water management in this context. Now, if you see, this question has 3 parts. What is virtual water export? Discuss as to how it depletes water resources in India, and suggest some measures for effective water management in this context. Now, this is a 10-marker question. We do understand the ideal way to go ahead would be 2 headings in the body. So whenever you have this kind of question, you can resolve them in the introduction itself. So in the introduction, we will talk about the definition. We can also put certain data points to represent how exactly this is a big issue. In the heading 1 of the body, you can talk about how exactly virtual water exports happen in India and what exactly is the issue related to the same. And in the heading 2 of the body, you can talk about the measures for effective water management in this context. And in the conclusion, you can talk about certain way ahead type of points. So let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can define virtual water export as in those products who are exported, but however, the production for the same requires large amount of water. Thus, that water is also exported in a way. You can also give examples of what kind of products we are talking about. We can talk about like textile products, machinery, livestock, and crops. You can also cite certain data points. Niti Aayog's data point on virtual water export since 2014, the data point cites that we have exported 10 trillion liters of virtual water via export of nearly 37 tons of basmati. Now this 10 trillion of water is only with respect to basmati rice. Apart from that, we have other products as well which were exported, and thus they were also part of the virtual water export process. So this is something you can write in the introduction. Let's move on to the body. In the heading, you can talk about that how exactly depletion of water resources happen in India through virtual water export. Firstly, we have witnessed that there are certain water intensive agricultural products such as sugarcane. India is one of the largest producer of sugar and also a largest exporter for the same, and we have seen that how sugarcane is a water intensive crop and it is also produced in certain regions where there is certain kind of issue with respect to water availability. So that definitely augments the issue of water stress, and this is how the depletion of water resources happen in India. You can talk about it how groundwater depletion happens as agriculture is almost consuming 90% of groundwater. So groundwater depletion also happens because of such kind of export of agricultural products. Next is lack of water pricing. This is something which have been also explicitly mentioned in Mihir Shah committee report, where we have seen that how government, there are certain kind of policies with respect to freebies, such as how water is subsidized for certain sectors such as agriculture, and because of that there is certain abuse of use of water, and for the same we have seen how water stress is also part of that product. Lastly, we have low water efficiency in industrial sector. For the same product, India is using almost 2 to 3 times more water compared to other nation. So that kind of low productivity with respect to water, as in low efficiency, also impacts and augments the issue of virtual water export. So these are the kind of points you can add for heading 1. Let's move on to the heading 2 of the body. Over here, we will write certain measures for effective water management. You can talk about how crop diversification can help with respect to safeguarding the water resources. You can talk about that we can rely on less water intensive crops, example millets. You can also talk about that we can promote micro irrigation to ensure that water is not wastage. In the previous part, we saw that there is lack of pricing for water resources. Over here, we can use that kind of micro irrigation structures to ensure that water is efficiently used in agriculture. Apart from that, there must be regulation for groundwater usage to ensure that groundwater is also conserved. You can talk about certain infrastructural units such as water harvesting structures through which we can ensure that water is recycled, reused, and thus conserved. And lastly, apart from that, you can talk about that how community participation is also very much of a primary need over here, where different stakeholders can come together and ensure that how they can make water conservation as a first priority. Apart from that, there should be focus on data. We witnessed in the Niti Aayog's report that certain amount of water was exported because of certain crop export. Now that kind of data point must be available for different export units so that we can optimize how exactly we are exporting things. We have seen that countries like China, they have ensured that kind of data points where they import certain elements which are water intensive, such as soya. So import of water intensive crop can also help with respect to safeguarding the water resources of the nation. So these are the kind of measures you can talk about for the heading 2 of this body. In the conclusion, you can talk about certain way ahead like of points. You can talk about how there is need for multi-stakeholder approach. Over here, we are ensuring that not just the producer, but also different stakeholders are part of the gameplay as in government, and there are certain incentives to make sure that virtual water export does not happen. Next is balancing economic interest and water conservation. Over here, as we witness that we can import certain water intensive crops or products to ensure that the water as a resource of the nation is safeguarded, and also the need for the certain products is also in place. And lastly is demand supply intervention. We have seen that how there are certain water intensive crops and products which are produced at certain regions where there is already issue of water shortages. So there should be certain kind of demand supply intervention to ensure that water stressed region are not part of the virtual water export process. So this is something you can write in the conclusion for question number 2. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can define virtual water export. You can also cite certain data points and also give certain products which are part of the virtual water export process. Then you can talk about how exactly depletion of water resources is happening because of virtual water export. You can list down different proof points along with substantiation. Similarly, for the measures, you can list down different measures along with how exactly they can help with respect to the conservation of water. And lastly, you can talk about certain way ahead of points with respect to conservation of water as a resource for the nation. So this is something for question number 2. Let's move on to question number 3, which is a current affairs based question. Let's read the question together. Discuss the impediments India is facing in pursuit of energy diplomacy. Now this is a 10-marker question, so you can have two bodies with respect to two headings in the body with respect to this topic. In the introduction, you can cite the recent context about India pursuing for energy diplomacy. In the heading 1 of the body, you can talk about certain initiatives that India is trying to ensure for energy security. In the heading 2, you can talk about certain impediments. And in the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead. So this is the structure of the answer. Let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, as I mentioned, you can talk about the recent news and the context. Over here, you can list down that how exactly India is actively pursuing energy diplomacy with different nations. We have seen different countries with respect to the same. India is not just making sure there are bilateral relationship, but is also putting efforts with respect to the entire global community. We witnessed how Global Biofuel Alliance is also part of India actively pursuing energy diplomacy. So these are the kind of points you can talk about. You can also give example of what exactly energy diplomacy refers to as a definition in the introduction. As in, energy diplomacy refers to the part and process of diplomacy where the nation is trying to ensure that energy is kind of the core negotiation for the country. So that is something you can write in the introduction. Let us move on to the body. Over here in the heading 1, you can talk about how exactly India is pursuing for energy diplomacy, which is kind of the primary demand of the question. Over here, we can talk about different proof points that how exactly India has realized. Firstly, you can talk about with respect to power transmission, India has signed various treaties and cooperation with different countries such as SAARC, where there is cooperation with different surrounding neighbor countries. Then we have seen how renewable energy transmission has been a priority. We have seen that how International Solar Alliance, along with One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative is helping with respect to securing energy needs of the nation. Then we have seen how pipe connectivity such as TAPI for natural gas transportation, where multiple countries are part of the entire project. Then we have seen also nuclear energy cooperation, where India has actively pursued certain deals with certain nations such as US, Japan with respect to energy security through nuclear energy. And we have also seen how hydroelectric cooperation is also kind of part of the energy diplomacy. We are importing power from Bhutan's different plants, also with Nepal, where India is actively investing in those projects to ensure they also become part of the entire energy matrix. So these are the kind of points you can talk about here. You can also talk about Global Biofuel Alliance, which was in the recent G20, where all the countries are making sure there is certain kind of collaboration for energy security. So this is something for heading 1 you can talk about in this question. Let's see in the heading 2 where we have to talk about certain impediments faced by the nation. Firstly, we have seen there is certain dependency on region. We have seen that how India has been historically dependent on the Middle East for oil and gas input. So that is something which we need to ensure that that dependency is not there. Second, there is power transmission charges because there are complex interconnected regional networks, and because of that kind of interconnected, there are various policies of different countries that affect the transmission charges. The third is technology intensity. Over here, we are looking certain technological advancement coupled with issues of how they must be implemented for the development of certain energy plants. So over here, we have to ensure the balance with respect to the technological advancement, and that has been kind of implementational issue. Next is cyber security risk. Now, we do understand that this all are part of critical infrastructure, and for the same, we have seen vulnerabilities for the same, as in we have seen in past certain cyber related attacks on certain plants. Then we have coal dependency. We have seen in the previous answer writing practice, there was a question with respect to the coal dependency, where coal has been part of more than 50% for the power production in the nation. So there is higher dependency, and thus with respect to energy diplomacy, we are also facing certain challenges because there is rise in the price of imported coal due to regulation of China with respect to their exports. Next is energy infrastructure bottleneck. We have seen that how India is actively installing certain infrastructure and collaborating with different nations, but there are still bottlenecks. We have seen certain issues with respect to certain nations such as Iran and Afghanistan, and similarly we have issues with respect to other nations where infrastructure is something that we are trying to actively pursue. The next is economic feasibility concern. We have seen higher cost with respect to transportation of the energy, such as subsea cable construction cost, volatile raw material cost, and that directly impacts India's effort with respect to pursuing energy diplomacy. And lastly is geopolitical dynamics. It directly affects energy partnership and causes supply chain disruption. We witnessed certain kind of disruption when we had seen the starting of Russia-Ukraine war. We have also seen certain kind of disruption with respect to Middle East. So these are the kind of geopolitical dynamics you can cite for supporting your argument over here. In the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead, as in we must diversify our imports to ensure whatever energy diplomacy that we are pursuing is realized through energy security. Nextly, we have seen that how ONGC Videsh initiative, which is in more than 15 countries, now this kind of initiatives helps with respect to diversification of not just the kind of fuel, but also with respect to different nations and their policy. We must take certain geographical location advantage, as in there is higher potential with respect to harnessing the solar energy and wind energy. Thus, in-house production of renewable sources can also help with respect to the energy security aspect. Then we must enhance energy cooperation, as in specific energy kind of energy related treaties, so that there is explicit understand. We have seen that there are certain kind of deals such as Green Deal with different nations. That kind of energy cooperation can help with respect to India's successful pursuit of energy diplomacy. And lastly, making sure we use our strategic position in international energy landscape. We have seen initiatives like International Solar Alliance, Global Biofuel Alliance. So these are the kind of initiatives that India can leverage to ensure energy security. So this is all for conclusion of question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about what exactly is energy diplomacy. You can cite certain proof points that are in the current affairs. In the heading 1 of the question, you can talk about how exactly India is pursuing energy diplomacy. You can give different proof points for the same along with example. Then you can talk about certain challenges, impediments faced by India, list down the impediments along with the example, and lastly, way ahead, you can talk about how exactly India can leverage certain aspects to ensure that energy diplomacy is realized into energy security. So this is all for question number 3. You are writing for answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. This month we are doing GS1, history, society and geography. Every day we are writing 3 questions from Monday to Friday. 2 questions on static, 1 questions on current affair. You can attempt this question at vajiramis.com and you can see the model answer and video discussion over here in the YouTube channel. So keep writing and thank you so much.